All right. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting episode of Daily December 2023. This is day 13. So, today, I'm going to just piss a lot of people off. Because I'm good at that. I want to talk about the Hasbro layoffs. Specifically, I want to talk about how a lot of people online are talking out of their asses, have no idea what they're talking about, and are overall just being a bunch of assholes. That being said, what's going on right now is both understandable and upsetting. And I want people to kind of understand this idea that something can be explainable and understandable and still not be good. A lot of people get this strange thing that if I explain why something has happened, I am somehow saying, well, then it's a good thing that it happened. No, it's not a good thing that it happened. However, it is understandable. It is something that makes sense. And I'm not saying understandable as in acceptable. Again, we get these weird conflations of different words where it's like, well, if it's understandable, that means it's acceptable. No. Understandable means exactly that. I can understand it. Acceptable also is not the same thing that a lot of people think it is. Acceptable means I can accept that happened. And again, that doesn't mean that it's good. It just means, okay, I'm going to accept that it happened. And acceptable should really be kind of the lowest kind of level of dealing with information, because acceptable is just admitting that you are going to believe what has happened. You're going to, okay, I accept that. So in this particular instance, it's been going around everywhere, and most of the publications have been trying to paint it as this corporate greed thing, and it's really not. And the reason, and the way that they're doing that is you will see all these different headlines that'll say something like Hasbro lays off 1,000 or 1,100. I've seen both numbers. 1,100 people right before Christmas, because they have to put that in there to make it really, really bad. Despite the fact that Wizards of the Coast is doing really well, or Dungeons and Dragons is doing really well. And they keep just saying all of this stuff. And I've seen other things going, whoa, Hasbro is going bankrupt and they're going to die and everything. And wow, and all this stuff. And then other people going, oh, they're these evil, horrible people. You know, their CEO makes blah, blah. Why doesn't he just take a pay cut? So I want to talk about exactly what has happened. And get rid of all this nonsense and hurt feelings and all this stuff and boycott this and capitalism that. 99% of the people talking about how evil capitalism is have no idea what capitalism is. They couldn't define it even if they wanted to. And they just want something to rage against. And they don't like people that have more money than them, which is most of the population for these people, because a lot of the people that are getting pissed off about my capitalism are broke as shit. Probably because they don't understand how capitalism works. And then there's a few people that I know for a fact are extremely well off. They're still going, my capitalism, because it's just popular to do. So anyway, so what exactly happened? Well, recently Hasbro, which if you are unaware, Hasbro is the parent company that owns a crap tons of stuff. However, they are mostly a toy company. Despite the fact that they own Wizards of the Coast and they own just a bunch of different things, they are mostly a toy company. That is where the vast majority of their revenue comes from, is from selling children's toys. And they have a lot of brands under that. I believe, I may be wrong here, I want to just see. So no. So I was looking into something because I was trying to figure out or trying to remember if Hasbro owned Barbie, which they do not. Barbie is owned by Mattel, and Barbie has recently had kind of a resurgence due to the Barbie movie making over $1 billion. It's been exceptionally successful. And so Mattel is doing pretty well. Hasbro, on the other hand, has not been doing well. And to be perfectly honest, Barbie has not been doing phenomenally well, even with this amazing movie, because, and here's the thing that's going to piss off a lot of people, we're in a recession. No, it can't be in a recession, because in order to be a recession, you have to have 3 straight quarters of loss of GDP. No, you don't, actually. That was a brand new rule that they just made up a few years ago. And I'm actually getting sick of how often I see economists, actually really smart people, that actually study economics and actually understand how recessions work in that way, arguing about the idea of whether or not we're in a recession, when the recession is going to start, how bad the recession is going to get. We're in a recession. For those of you that don't know, the economic cycle is really, really simple. You have at the top here, you have your kind of peak. You have your kind of peak production period, and then it goes this way, and this, and as it starts to decline, that's called a recession, when things are not doing well as well as you want. And then as it gets to the bottom and it gets to the worst it's going to be in this particular cycle, you have what's called a depression. And most people, when they think of depression, they think of the Great Depression, which happened in the 1920s and is worldwide was the worst depression most modern countries have ever dealt with. And the reason it's called a depression is it gets to the lowest point of the economic cycle. And then you have a growing period, and then you have your, and I can't remember what the term for this top period is, but basically the good times are here. And that is a continuous cycle. It goes over and over and over, and it's actually remarkably predictable. It follows, for the most part, it will generally follow about a 20-year cycle, give or take about 5 or 10 years. Every roughly 20 years, we will have a good period, we will have a recession, we will have a depression, then we will have a growing period, and we will reach a peak. Over and over and over again, that's how it works. Now, certain things will modify that. You can have really, really strong top periods. I wish I could remember the name for that term. But you can have really, really strong economic growth periods, and then really minor recessions and really minor depressions, and then another really great growth period. And a minor recession might be that it's short, where it only lasts a year or two. It might be that the recession itself is just not massive, where GDP really doesn't drop that much, things like that. And the depression might be really mild as well. And again, that could be it's either very short or it just isn't that impactful. And they can be really, really bad. There was, I think in 2009, for a while, people were calling it the Great Recession, because we couldn't call it the Great Depression. We had one of those already. But we had a really, really bad financial crisis in 2009, and it set off this really, really bad recession, one of the worst recessions that the U.S. has ever seen until now. So you can have these really bad recessions. And again, the thing that makes them bad is either they last a long time or you lose lots of money. The market itself cools so quickly that people can't adjust to it. And then you'll have a depression. Again, the depression is just the low part. It doesn't mean that people are, starving to death or anything. Depression, from an economic standpoint, just means you're at the low part. You're at the end of the recession. You're at the worst part of the market that is going to be in this particular economic cycle. And then you get a growth period again. And the same thing can be true about growth periods and high points in economics. If you look at the dot-com boom in the 90s under Clinton, That was a huge growth period, and then a really, really long. I think it lasted somewhere between like 5 and 9 years, where we had just this huge boom in our economy, mostly due to the internet taking off and creating all these new jobs and all these new opportunities. And then we got Bush and we hit a recession, we hit a depression, and it really wasn't that bad because we went from this massive, amazing thing to, we had the dot-com bubble burst and it wasn't phenomenal, but it wasn't the worst thing in the world. And so most people don't even worry about it. It didn't affect most people's lives. And then we got back on the cycle, and during Obama's administration, we had the Great Recession, and some really bad stuff happened, and then we went back. And so now you guys will notice that it hasn't been 20 years since our last recession. So the economic cycle has changed a little bit. Things have gotten shorter. Our growth period, we had a growth period roughly from around 2017-ish all the way up through 2019. And then something that nobody can explain happened in 2020. And I have no idea what it was. And I'm sure no one in my audience or anywhere around the world would know what might have happened in 2020 that changed how our economic cycle was working. But something did happen. And we went through effectively an instant recession. Because we closed a lot of businesses, and we did a lot of things that just completely destroyed our economy on purpose. Like, it wasn't like, ooh, we didn't know this was going to happen. We all knew, and we all kind of agreed to the idea that, yes, closing down stores and things like that is going to instantly kill our economy. And it was a, what's the word I'm looking for? It was a calculated risk. It went poorly, by the way. And a lot of people are now trying to say, well, we had no idea it would do this. No, we knew it back then. We just took a calculated risk. You know, we were hoping, you know, we let it all ride, and then Snake Eyes came up. And we're like, oh, shit. So anyway, since about 2021-ish, because from an economic perspective, because what happened in 2020 is completely unprecedented. It's never been done in the history of economics, and it will, if we're smart, it'll never be done again, because it was one of the worst things ever. But you can't really plot that on an economic cycle. We literally just took a massive hammer and smashed our economy into tiny little pieces. So you can't really fit that on an economic cycle. We broke it on purpose, and then we went back, and again, about 2021, 22, we started dealing with this, and the economy's just been getting worse and worse and worse since 2021. It's just, nothing that has happened has been good. We have massive inflation. We had the housing bubble grow like crazy high and then instantly burst. Lots of horrible things. And again, around that time, they also redefined what a recession was, because there are actual definitions of what a quote-unquote recession is. And it used to be, I think, two quarters of negative GDP, and then they changed it to 3/4 of negative GDP, and then they kept kind of changing it to not have to admit that we were in a recession. We're in a recession. And one of the easiest ways to tell that is every major company is firing staff. Most of them are doing it in relatively large chunks. And when I say relatively large chunks, I can think of, I think, 4 different companies this year that have fired around 1,000 to 1,500 people in one shot. And the interesting thing about that, due to labor laws, depending on which state you are, firing that many people all at once is actually relatively damning to a business, because it requires a bunch of extra stuff. Like, you actually have to tell the employees that, hey, by the way, we're going to be doing this massive layoff relatively soon. And I believe, depending on the state that you live in, you have to give them either like 30 or 60 days notice before they no longer have jobs, unless there's something catastrophic that happens. So there are these laws called I think they're called mass layoff or mass firing laws. And again, they vary from state to state. So depending on which state you are incorporated in, you're going to have different things to do. But it's generally in a business's best interest to not fire a huge chunk of their workforce all at once. It's always, 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 always better to do it in small amounts. And here's another thing that people don't like. Businesses need to fire people regularly. And the reason why is the hiring process in and of itself is not great, just in general. And there's been a lot of things that companies have tried to do to improve the hiring process. And by improve, that basically just means weeding out the employees that they're eventually going to have to fire. And most of it hasn't worked. Really, the only good way to improve the hiring process is to invest in your hiring managers. And most companies are not willing to do that because a lot of the things that makes a good hiring manager are relatively subjective. And being able to kind of define that is not something that most businesses want to do. They want objective numbers-based things. It's one of the reasons why if you apply for any entry-level job right now, or at least this is how it used to be back when I could work. I don't know if they're still using this, but I think they probably are. Seeing as I've talked to a few people and they go, oh, I remember that. You will have to do a personality typing test. And most of them are based on the Myers-Briggs personality index, I think is going to, or personality type index, MBTI. And for those of you that don't know, the MBTI is complete nonsense. Your horoscope is more accurate than your MBTI. It's a bunch of phony baloney. And psychologists have known it for decades. That everything from the time of day when you take the test to your mental state to how recently you've eaten something will change your MBTI type. And if you guys have never heard this, you may have heard of people referring to themselves like by a grouping of 4 letters. That's your MBTI. And it's complete and utter nonsense. But it was created back in, I think, the 80s, and a bunch of really, really big companies paid like $50 or $60 million to have psychologists create this thing, and it was intended to be something that could predict good employees better. It's completely worthless. So anyway, companies need to fire people on a regular basis. There are always going to be people that are not a fit for the company or actively hurting your company that you are going to need to fire. And unfortunately, a lot of the ways that you find that out is having them work for you and screw up your company. And it really, really sucks. And a well-run company is able to notice the bad things before the bad things are bad enough that they damage the company irreparably. And a poorly run company will not notice any of the bad things happening until somebody makes a massive, massive mistake that costs the company hundreds of millions of dollars. So companies have to fire people on a fairly regular basis. And it also means that companies need to hire people on a fairly regular basis. Does that mean that these large lump firings are just completely okay and everyone should get... No. Again, as I mentioned before, doing large firings like this is bad. It means that somebody at the company has done something wrong. Because again, this is something that is going to happen. People are going to lose their jobs. It's just how it works and to be perfectly honest, in any kind of economy. People are going to lose their jobs. That's how it works. Companies change. People change. People are going to lose their jobs. However, that many people losing their jobs that quickly means somebody missed some rather major signs that, hey, we need to change what we're doing. So, again, not saying that it was inevitable that 1,000+ people were going to be instantly fired. I'm saying that there was probably something that went wrong. And this is where I'm going to go into prediction mode. This is entirely me just predicting things based on my understanding of business and my understanding of the economy. Everyone is freaking out in the back that, well, they're doing it right before Christmas, and this is when people need their money the most. Well, a lot of that has to do with the fact that we overvalue the idea of gift giving on Christmas and kind of link how much you love somebody by how much money you spend on them. If we would stop doing that, it really wouldn't matter that they were getting fired just before Christmas. Here's a news flash. There's never a good time to fire someone. Ever. There is not, like, let's just say, because everyone's freaking out because it's Christmas. Let's say they waited until after New Year's. Well, they fired them right at the beginning of the year. Okay, let's not do January then, because that's the new year. You know, you're trying new things. You need more money then. Let's go to February. They're firing them for Valentine's Day, so now all the single people not only have to spend Valentine's Day alone, but now they're poor. Okay, let's move it forward. You're firing them for Easter? That's religious discrimination. There isn't a good time to fire people. There just isn't. So, and then mass firings like this are even worse. And there's never going to be a good time to do that. So again, not saying that this was good or anything like that. I'm saying there isn't a good time. Now, my prediction, this is entirely me predicting things. I have no information other than my own thoughts and my understanding of business. I do not know anyone at Hasbro. I know a few people at Wizards of the Coast. They don't talk to me, though. Yeah, I like. Please do not think I have some kind of insider information. I do not. This is just a prediction. What I'm thinking, because I've seen it happen in other businesses, is the higher-ups at Hasbro were not doing well, or Hasbro in general has not been doing well this year, because all companies have not been doing well this year. And Black Friday was coming. For those of you that don't live in the States, Black Friday is a huge sale day for the U.S. Black Friday makes up... I used to know the numbers. It's a sickening amount of total sales for the year. Like this one day normally makes up, I have it in the fog. It makes up a big chunk. Like if Black Friday goes well, it will change our economy. Black Friday goes poorly, it will change our economy. If anyone didn't know, Black Friday sucked this year. Both in actual revenue and on the consumer side, the sales that most people get excited about Black Friday, because things will be like 60%, 70%, 80%, 90% off just to get people into a buying frenzy. Those sales didn't happen. For the most part, like there were these little investigations where people were finding out that the Black Friday quote unquote sales were the same sales that they'd had for the past week. And the sales themselves were not that spectacular, 10, 20% off, still a nice sale. But it doesn't justify waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and then standing outside in freezing cold weather for 2 hours to get into the store at 5 a.m. and then fighting a bunch of people to try and get this one doorbuster deal that you have to absolutely have because money's. Black Friday was not a good day for anyone this year. And so my prediction is Hasbro was banking on Black Friday being significantly better than it was, as was the entire market. Again, up until that point, or up until Black Friday, everybody, all of the business people that I know, and all of the different websites and that were talking about how great Black Friday was going to be because it was going to be a way to make up for all the poor sales all throughout the year, and everyone was really excited about it, and we needed something fun to happen and to be able to like be consumers again because of just how absolutely shitty this entire year has been, and it just didn't happen. Black Friday was really bad. Hasbro has been doing poorly all year. Their Black Friday sales were abysmal, as was everyone else's. So we're getting to the end of the year. And this is another thing that a lot of people don't realize. Fiscal year and calendar year, very rarely do they coincide. A lot of companies will start their fiscal year at different places. Like I believe I used to work for an office supply store that shall remain nameless. And if I remember correctly, I think our fiscal year ended either just before back to school stuff or just after. And the reason they did that was back to school time for office supplies in general. Is Black Friday for like 2 months. It is insane. You can like increase your sales by like an order of magnitude. It was absolutely nuts, and it was not a fun time to work. I used to, depending on the store I was working in, I used to work between 60 and 80 hours a week during back to school time, and I never pulled that kind of just horrible shifts during the holiday season. So different companies will have their fiscal year start in different places. But even even companies that keep the fiscal year around the same time, your fiscal year is never going to stop on December 31st or start on January 1st. It's just not how it works. Generally, your fiscal year will start a few weeks into January if your fiscal year starts in January. But it's never going to be the first or second week in January, because you're still kind of dealing with the holiday season and all the stuff from that, and you don't want your balance books to kind of split that total into 2 different years. That just will always make you look worse. So at this point in time, I do not know when Hasbro's fiscal year officially starts. I'm going to predict it starts in January. And the reason I'm predicting that is because it makes the most sense to fire people now to get the final bump to make your fiscal year look a little bit better. And that's why I think they fired them right now as opposed to a couple of weeks ago. Again, my assumption here, complete assumption, I don't have any insider information, is they were banking on Black Friday doing really well. The sales numbers were not what they needed to be. It does take time to go through all the steps necessary to do a firing like this. And so they should have been firing people all throughout the year, probably in like 100 or 200 person batches. That is still large enough to trigger mass firing laws. Most mass firing laws start triggering at around, I think, 50 people, sometimes not up to 100. But they should have been firing more people as the year went on. But firing people also has another problem. Firing people costs money. The average cost to hire someone, back when I got my degree, so we're going off of like 7 or 8 years ago, average cost to hire someone was about anywhere between $15,000 to $18,000. And that includes the actual process of paying someone to interview them and paying everybody that is involved in the hiring process, and then the additional filing fees and everything that you have to do to get them all set up in your system, and how much it costs to train them, and how many times they're going to make mistakes when they're new on the job. All that stuff is actually factored in. And again, most companies, it cost anywhere between $15,000 to $18,000, or at least it did half a decade ago. Those numbers have all gone up by now. To fire someone cost anywhere between about $30,000 to $32,000. So it costs twice as much money to fire someone as it does to hire someone. And firing someone includes the cost of litigation, the cost of dealing with unemployment claims, dealing with increases to unemployment insurance. For those of you that don't know, companies actually pay for what's called unemployment insurance. They also pay for workers' comp insurance and all these other things. And depending on how many times people get unemployment payments, your unemployment insurance can go up. Because it basically means that you're getting rid of people without a good reason to do so, which is completely legal, but it means that they're entitled to unemployment benefits. And so the more people that successfully get unemployment after working for your company, despite the fact that it's not your company that's paying them, it's the government, well, it increases the amount that you have to pay for your unemployment insurance, which is why a lot of companies have at least one, bigger companies will have whole departments that are dedicated just to fighting unemployment claims because it costs them significant amounts of money. So they should have been firing people off, but firing people off costs money and it also costs them work. Having a larger staff means the staff can do more things. So somebody, rolled the dice at the company. Probably a lot of people rolled the dice and went, well, if we have a good Black Friday, then we won't have to do a mass firing or anything like that. We'll be perfectly fine. Or at least it'll be less than we have to. And so they were banking on Black Friday. Again, if you remember reading all of the news articles and stuff talking about Black Friday going up to it, everybody was positive about it. And part of that was spin. They were trying, media companies and things like that were trying to get people excited about Black Friday because that increases revenue and revenue increases ad buys. And it's this kind of weird incestuous relationship between big companies and the media because they rely almost exclusively on ad buys. So they wanted people to spend money too. And so you had all this positive press about Black Friday and it's going to be good, and then it wasn't, and now you've got to pay the piper. And so that is why, in my opinion, my prediction, that is why all these people just got fired recently. Now, again, the spin that the media has been putting on it has been, well, they're doing it despite the fact that Dungeons and Dragons is doing so well. Parent company Hasbro is firing 11,000 people because they're evil capitalists. No. First of all, Dungeons and Dragons is absolutely tiny. It is unbelievably tiny compared to all the other stuff that Hasbro owns. Until like 3 or 4 years of 5th edition being a thing, they never even mentioned Dungeons and Dragons on their annual earnings call. And when they started mentioning D&D on it, that was a massive deal because, again, Hasbro is a massive, massive multi-billion-dollar company. And D&D is not. Their best year they have ever had, if I remember correctly, the best year that they've ever had was somewhere in total revenue was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 1 to 2 billion. And that is a drop in the bucket for Hasbro. Well, here, let's actually look. I'm going to look. Hasbro. I don't think that's. Maybe I'm thinking of the wrong numbers then. Hasbro has a market cap or net worth of $6.71 billion. As opposed to December, its market has increased by about 20% in 1 year, 23.24%. So it was about 20% higher, which would be in the last year, which would be in the neighborhood of like 7-ish billion plus numbers. So I can't actually remember. I think I might be wrong about the WotC numbers then. But anyway. Or no, maybe it was... anyway. What I'm trying to say, and I have no numbers to back this up, is Wizards of the Coast themselves are not a massive part of Hasbro. Hasbro makes significantly more. The majority of their money they make from other things. I think maybe that's what it was. Is Wizards of the Coast did the like $1 billion year, and then D&D was like maybe 20% of that. So they're a piece of a piece, and even I want to say it was $1 or $2 billion or somewhere in between there is that WotC made 1 year. And even then, again, Hasbro was doing a lot better, and we're still only looking at about 10 to 15% of Hasbro's total revenue is built into Wizards of the Coast. Now, Wizards of the Coast this year has not been doing super well either. Dungeons and Dragons have been doing pretty well, but the D&D movie was a bit of a flop. I believe it might have lost money in theaters simply because it cost, I think it's something like $150 million to make, and it made, I want to say, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 220 million, somewhere in there. And for those of you who don't know, people are going, well, wait a minute, it only cost 150 million. They made that's $70 million. No, it doesn't work that way. For a movie to break even, you generally have to double the production costs, because marketing and promotion is generally whatever the production costs are, double it, and that's what your marketing costs are going to be. So for $150 million movie, they probably spent, and they didn't market the D&D movie massively well. They probably still spent at least $100 million, if not $50 million marketing the movie, because marketing is incredibly expensive. So D&D movie did not do super well. There was the whole OGL fiasco that didn't have anywhere near the impact that the proponents of it claimed that it had on D&D, but it still was a minor impact. And then there's the fact that when D&D is coming out, or D&D 5.5 is coming out next year, and the way that works is as soon as you announce the new thing, people stop buying the old thing. And that, combined with the fact that their more recent publications have not been super warmly received. I did a few in-depth reviews on them this year, and then I just stopped because people didn't want to watch them, and I didn't enjoy making them. I was getting really burnt out with D&D in general. So, D&D has been doing well enough. I believe it's actually up versus last year, but last year was a dumpster fire, just like the year before for our economy. So being up against last year is not that great. But even if D&D is doing really, really well this year, that's still an absolutely insignificant part. We're talking about less than 1% of what Hasbro makes revenue-wise. And that's revenue, not profit. A lot of people conflate the idea of revenue and profit. I was having a conversation with my buddy DK, where he was talking about, things that streamers don't quite understand and shouldn't do. And he brought up the idea that he hates merch. And one of the reasons that he hates merch, and it's much more complicated than this, DK is a remarkably intelligent person and has a relatively good business mind. Not great. Like, there's quite a few times where I've had to kind of sit down with him and go, hey, listen, you know how I said don't do this, and then you did it and it didn't work? Yeah, the reason it didn't work is all the reasons I gave you before you did it. So maybe don't do that again. But he is 100% right about this. Profit margins on merch for most streamers are going to be anywhere between 5 to 15%. So if you buy, a t-shirt from your favorite streamer, they will probably only get anywhere between about 5 to 15% of the money that you pay. All the rest of it goes to the manufacturer, the website host, whatever it is. And anybody, when they hear those numbers, they go, God, those are horrible margins. That's horrible. How can anyone live off that? I had a career in retail. Guess what? That's how physical goods work. The idea of 50% profit margins doesn't exist in the real world. It never has. Your normal, your good profit margin is somewhere between 20 to 30%. Those are your best items that you sell, are somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30%. Everything else that you sell, anywhere between about 7 to 14% is relatively average for most retailers. Now, obviously, there's going to be differentiations depending on, who the retailer is. Like Walmart is going to get some slightly better deals, but because they undercut everybody, they're not getting that much better profit. Again, their big profit items are still only going to be in the upper 30s and 40% profit margins, and I almost will guarantee, again, no actual knowledge of this, I'm just predicting, if they have more than a couple items in the entire store, they get up to a 50% profit margin. I would be extremely surprised. Profit margins are not large. They never have been. In every business in the world, if you're making 20 to 30% profit, you're doing really, really well. So when we look at the fact that Hasbro is down 20% this year, that means that that's probably most, if not all, of the profit for the company didn't happen this year. Because again, companies don't operate on massive profit margins. They never have. So they probably made very little, if nothing, this year, which looks really, really bad to investors who are the people that own the business. And if the investors are not making money, they sell their stock, and then the business goes under. Stock in and of itself is a remarkably complicated thing, but the very basics of how stock and liabilities and things like that work is companies do not operate on real money. What they do is they gain a bunch of assets. And some of those assets are intellectual property. Some of those assets are physicals, things like computers and printers. And your assets are a mixture of a lot of different things. And then you use those assets to get loans. And those are your liabilities. And there's a bunch of different kinds of liabilities. There are liabilities you have with customers who just haven't paid you yet. And there's liabilities with suppliers and all these other things. But a large chunk of liabilities is going to be loans that you have used your assets to offset in order to be able to make your business function. So every business in the world functions in debt. That's how it works. What happens is you have to have enough assets so that if you default on any of your loans, the company that owns those loans can be relatively certain that if they just take all your stuff, they will get most of their money back. As soon as your assets get too low to where they can no longer cover your liabilities, companies will go, okay, we want our money now. And that's called foreclosing. And that's what causes companies to go belly up and declare bankruptcy and all those other things. Stock is one of those assets that companies use. And if your stock numbers go down, eventually you will reach a point where you can no longer offset your liabilities. If this value of the company goes down, you can no longer offset your little liabilities. And a smart company has a bunch of smaller loans from a bunch of different lenders, so that level where lenders are thinking about foreclosing is significantly lower than your total liabilities. Because if all of your debt is held by a single company, let's say you've got $20 million in little liabilities. That would mean as soon as it's getting close to like your company's only worth like 23, 24 million, they're going to call in that loan immediately because they're going to lose a lot of money. However, if you have 10 companies that each has given you $2 million, well, then when your company's getting down to 23, 22, $20 million valuation, well, they're still significantly higher. And so they're not going to be as worried. And most lenders will also look at the other loans that you have, so they'll know that you still have $20 million in liability, but they're only really thinking about their company. And they know as soon as they as soon as they try to call on one of their loans, every other company's going to do it too. So there's this kind of weird stalemate. But that number will eventually get to the point where the companies go, I'm not willing to risk this anymore. I want my money. We're going to do it. So Hasbro is probably not making a ton of profit this year. And the way that you fix that is you get rid of some of your costs. Payroll is one of the easiest to control costs in your business. When you go to business school, they will kind of beat into your brain. Payroll is your most controllable cost. Payroll is your most controllable cost. There are so many different ways that you can modify how much you are paying in payroll without having to reduce anyone's pay. Things like ensuring people aren't working overtime. Overtime, depending on where you are, is either time and a half or double, and it costs you so much for the exact same workers. Making sure that you are adequately staffed is a really, really easy way to cut down on payroll, because having the right number of people, not too many, not too few, to do the jobs that you want. If you have too few people, the jobs take longer and you have to pay them more. If you have too many people, then the jobs don't take any shorter. You just have people that you're wasting money on. And then other things like ensuring that, your mixture of full-time to part-time employees is good, that you're, making sure that anytime you do fire someone, you're firing for cause so that they're not getting unemployment benefits and hiking up your unemployment costs. You ensure that your workplace is safe so that you're not losing people to injuries and increasing your workman's comp insurance. Like these are all things that are very, very controllable. And so the first step in the business book of, the end of the year, we have to give out not only our quarterly earnings and everything, or technically next year, not only do we have to deal with our quarterly earnings report, which is not going to be fun, but we also have to do our yearly earnings report. And if it shows that we are either making very little profit or we actually have negative profit, well, then we're going to be in big trouble, because people are going to start selling, and that's going to cause a lot of issues. So the first thing that most companies do is they fire people. It's an extremely common practice. Again, not saying it's a good practice. Again, I just mentioned there's so many other ways that you can control payroll without firing anyone, but all of that takes a lot more work. Firing people is extremely simple. And it's really easy to see on a balance sheet, because all you have to do is you have to take their salary or their hourly wage and take it off your costs column. And look, I just made money. And now that Black Friday is over, businesses are not going to be working anywhere near as much. People were going to be taking vacations and time off in the next couple of weeks anyway. So they're not going to lose a massive amount of productivity from laying off a bunch of people. So unfortunately, that's what happens. Now, as far as I have seen, the vast majority of these layoffs have nothing to do with Wizards of the Coast. There have been some people that no longer work for Wizards of the Coast. I do not follow everybody that works for Wizards of the Coast or everybody on the D&D team. Oh, by the way, Wizards of the Coast is mostly not D&D. Magic the Gathering is their big thing. And the vast majority of their employees work for Magic the Gathering. And I don't follow any Magic the Gathering people. I do follow a few people that work for Dungeons and Dragons specifically, because it's a big part of my life. And we have started seeing people losing their jobs. I think I have seen 2 people officially announce that they no longer work for Wizards of the Coast. I do not know how large the Wizards of the Coast team is. And I believe more people have been fired than I personally know about. But it would surprise me if more than maybe a dozen or 24 people lost their jobs from the D&D team for a number of reasons. One, again, D&D is actually making money. It's not making a ton of money, and it's not making as much money as it used to, but it's still, the accounting terms, it's still in the black. The reason they call that is in most accounting books, if you are under revenue, if you have a negative number, it's written in red, and if you have a positive number, it's written in black. So they call it in the black. But Dungeons & Dragons is definitely in the black. However, there were still people working there that could be trimmed without creating a massive issue. I personally, and this is just going to be me being petty, and I understand that this is going to sound very horrible. I personally think that the people, or the person, I don't know if it was multiple people or just one, that outright lied during the OGL fiasco, that claimed that Wizards of the Coast doesn't look at your feedback and all those other things that were immediately disproven, that person should be fired. In addition, the person that for the Spelljammers book put in that really racist artwork, they should be fired too, and should have been fired back then. But to my understanding, neither of those 2 people were fired. So who knows? I do know one person specifically that I was very, very sad to see them go. Amy Dallin has announced that she's no longer working for D&D Beyond, which is owned by the D&D, and that's extremely sad because Amy Dallin is probably the nicest, most wonderful person on the planet. She's an amazing person. And the other person that I saw lost their job, I'd never heard of them before. But Tristan Falcone had mentioned, because Tristan works for, at least I hope it's, I know their first name is Tristan. I don't know if they're still using Falcone. But anyway, so Tristan works for Wizards of the Coast, and to my understanding, at least as of recording this video, they still worked at Wizards of the Coast. So yeah, extremely sad that that Amy is gone, and this other person is gone as well. I feel horrible for them, but to be blunt, it's not particularly shocking news. It's not good news, but this is how the business world works. And it's not malicious. It's not these evil people at the top going, ooh, how can I give myself more money? It's not what CEOs do. Being a CEO is a remarkably difficult job. The reason that they get paid as well as they do is because they create that kind of value. I know a lot of people don't believe that, and they think that CEOs just kind of sit on their ass and collect money. They don't. Most CEOs work for companies longer than most employees. That's another kind of myth that I've seen people spreading around the internet, that CEOs are just will jump in, make some money, and then jump to another company. They don't. The average CEO tenure is anywhere between 7 to 14 years. The average employee tenure is less than 5. So CEOs are there longer than most employees. And they do care about their companies, and their jobs are very, very difficult. It's why they get paid so much. Do I believe that all CEOs are these wonderful, amazing, people that deserve, candy? No. There are a lot of assholes that run companies. To be perfectly honest, being a CEO requires a bit of being an asshole. Most CEOs, before they become CEOs, tend to work, 50 to 60 hours a week for 10 or 15 years. They don't have families. They very rarely have friends. They dedicate their entire lives to business. It is a horrible existence. And it tends to create some rather unpleasant people. However, I don't believe this is corporate greed or anything like that. It is literally how businesses work. The business doesn't make money, it can't pay people. And this idea that, well, why can't the CEO just take less money? You tell a CEO he's going to take less money, he will just leave. Again, it's an incredibly difficult job. It's a remarkably thankless job. And when, because the company is doing poorly, you're going to dock their pay, they're just going to go find a new job. That's how it works. And I know you guys are going, but you just said that they care about their company and that yeah, because they get paid to care about their companies. That's how it works. So yeah, and everyone will bring up the idea, well, Shigeru Miyamoto took pay cuts so he wouldn't have to fire his employees. That's because the Japanese work market is insanely different than the American work market. Employees' rights is not really a thing in Japan. You are expected to sacrifice everything for your job. And if you're not, you are not just a bad employee, you're a bad person. You will be shunned by society. It is an extremely different process. And the idea of a worker exploiting their company is thought of as a horrible, disgusting thing. Whereas here, a worker exploiting their company, depending on how low on the totem pole they are, is highly encouraged. The idea of quiet quitting, which isn't a thing, as much as people try and make it look like that, and the idea that, you know, I'm going to do the least amount of work possible, or I'm going to do this and try and get paid the most amount of money for doing nothing, and doesn't exist in Japan. So yeah, it makes perfect sense to me that one Japanese company would do that, because Shigeru Miyamoto is a genuinely good person. And if I'm confusing people, it's because, again, my brain is very, very bad. If it wasn't Shigeru Miyamoto and it was somebody else that did that, correct me in the comments, because, again, I have a hard time remembering my own name. And I am constantly changing. So, yes. So this whole thing about, you know, let's boycott Hasbro. Don't. Literally every company, every major company this year has fired at least 1,000 people. A lot of them have gone to 2, 3, 4, 5,000 people. That's just what happens when you're in a recession. Companies get smaller. Black Friday didn't do the numbers that they were planning on. They had to cut the fat by a pretty drastic amount. Again, it's my personal theory that this probably could have, firing all of them at once probably could have been avoided by trimming the fat earlier in the year. But the end result was going to be all the people that don't have jobs now were not going to have jobs now. It's just really just changing when they were not going to have jobs. And again, as I mentioned before, there is never a good time to fire people. It doesn't exist. So you basically have to take the idea of good or bad time to fire people out of the equation. Just go, okay, people are getting fired. We're going to do it at when it makes the most sense business-wise. It's just business. Again, and I know a lot of people are going to get very, very upset and saying, well, how can you defend them? I'm not defending them. I'm explaining why it happened, because so many people are trying to push this narrative that that they're these evil, conniving people that are relishing in the fact that they are ruining Christmas for people. No company wants to fire 1,000 people. It's costing them shit tons of money to do that, in addition to all the bad press that they're getting right now. They did not want to do this. They had to. And I know this because I have seen it happen over and over and over again. There are very, very few times where firing someone is something that you want to do. A lot of times you have to have a conversation, depending on how many people are firing. You have to have a very difficult conversation where you sit someone down and go, hey, we appreciate everything that you've done for the company, but unfortunately, we just can't keep you in the company anymore. And I'm really sorry about this. It's not an enjoyable conversation, ever. These mass firings are slightly easier on the emotional scale because you don't have to talk to every single person. But I will guarantee every single manager that got the notice of the following people are no longer working for you felt horrible about it, with a few rare exceptions. Again, there's always that one or two employees that you wish you could fire. Not only you wish you could fire, you wish you could go up to them with the pink slip in hand and go, hey, jackass, go fuck yourself. I never want to talk to you again. But for the most part, those employees are few and far in between. It's a horrible thing that's happened. I'm not trying to say that this is good or that people need to stop being sad about it. I just don't want people to keep harping on about this idea that if just the CEO would take a pay cut. No, 1,000 people working for a company that doesn't employ a ton of entry level. You don't have a ton of entry level people. This is not, a single drop in the bucket. Firing or getting rid of 1,000 people, they probably saved hundreds of millions of dollars. Especially when you factor that over the entire year that they're going to save from not paying them next year and things like that. they probably saved, well, maybe hundreds of millions might be a little bit overestimate. Probably saved at least 15 to 20 million, maybe upwards of 100 million, easily. And that's just from dealing with the pay that they're not going to be paying out for the month of December. When you factor it, the longer it goes, and the fact that if they fill those positions, a lot of times they're going to be able to either fill multiple positions with a single person or be able to hire multiple people for the same amount that a single person was costing them. Like, this isn't something that a CEO can just take a dock and pay and cover. 1,000 or 1,100, whatever the number is, that's a lot of people who make a lot of money. It's how it works. It sucks. I'm not trying to say that this is a good thing or that the people that are fired should somehow be thankful or anything. No. Be upset. Be angry that you were on the chopping block. It might be that you deserve to be fired. It's more likely than not that you were just the unfortunate person that they were able to deal without. Not that you were replaceable. It was just when they had a choice between, 4 different people, you were the one that was the least valuable to the company. And it really, really sucks. And I'm not trying to say that it doesn't or you shouldn't be upset. I'm saying that this isn't some dastardly evil deed where they're trying to extract as much money as physically possible out of. It's not. This is how businesses work. I wish more people would understand how businesses work, because then we could work towards trying to fix them instead of morons yelling out about, well, the CEO should take a pay cut because that'll fix everything. No, it won't. Wouldn't have changed a damn thing. CEOs get fired too, not nearly as often, because, again, they're a lot more difficult to find a replacement for. Again, that whole thing of you work 60 to 80 hours a week for 10 to 15 years, there's not a ton of people that are willing to do that. So CEOs are in a remarkably short supply. And there's not that many of them either. Like on the Fortune 500, there are only 500 CEOs because you can only have one CEO per business. So it's not like there's tons of them. And there's still not that many more. So, yeah, stop with this idea of this is all evil corporate greed. It's not. This is how businesses work. You want to change it? You need to understand how the business works. You want to bitch and moan and just be an unbelievably annoying person that makes the problem worse by vilifying the wrong people? Go for it. But don't do it here because I'm sick of it. I would love to watch the business world change for the better. But 99% of the suggestions about how to change the business world for the better are made by people who don't understand how businesses work and would do nothing but get a lot of people fired and close down even more businesses. You want to fix the problem? Learn what the actual problem is. Don't bitch and moan about things that you don't understand. And again, this stuff is not particularly difficult to learn. All the information is out there, and there are lots of people that you can talk to, myself included, that can explain how real businesses work. But we get this fantasy world put into our head that, well, once you get above a certain level in a business, everything is perfect and you can never be fired and your job is super easy. You just sit on your ass and collect your money. That doesn't happen. Or at least in the few times that it does, they are the massive exception to the rule. That's not how businesses actually work. And if you want to change them, learn how they fucking work, you dipshits. God, this pisses me off. There are so many things that could be done to improve our economy and to improve working conditions. And the reason that they don't get done is morons that don't understand the system deciding that, well, I'm going to change the system by doing this. I'm going to make all CEOs get taxed at 99%. Would not fix a fucking thing. All that would happen is the government would waste more money. Never going to change a goddamn thing. But doing things like investing in better training programs. If we had a better trained workforce, businesses would be able to run significantly better. People would have better job security. So many other things would be improved if we just trained our employees and invested in our employees a little bit more. It would make people shit tons of money. But nobody wants to talk about that because we have to sit here bitching and moaning about, ooh, the CEOs have too much money and I wants the money. I wants the money now. Go fuck yourselves. Learn how a real business runs and then try and actually do something good instead of bitching and moaning to make yourself feel better. That's all for me. I'll see you guys tonight when I run my game. Bye.